Hi, Lou here to talk about 10 mistakes to avoid in tabletop game design, although many of these also apply to video game design. Now, there are many mistakes I'm not listing here because they may have already been covered via the positive in 10 need-to-knows about game design and 11 more need-to-knows about game design. And I'm also leaving out playtesting. Also, these are technical mistakes, not the really big ones like I'm going to get rich, which is in fact most unlikely. So here's the list. There are in fact 10 when we get onto the second page, and I'll go through each one. And I'm not doing these in any particular order. The gentleman's fallacy, which is that's not the way to play. You just cannot hope that people will play the way you want them to play. The game has to make them play that way, has to make that the best way to succeed, because many players play in order to succeed. So when you hear a designer say, that's not the way I meant it to be played, you're listening to a failure. A failure. Camping in video games is an example. If the rules make camping a good tactic, players are going to do it. You can't say, oh, camping is bad, you shouldn't do that. Oh, camping is not sporting. Yes, there is sportsmanship in gameplay, but it shouldn't be used as an excuse for sloppy design. If you're designing a game just for yourself and your friends, then you can enforce how they play, then that's okay, but you can't do that in a commercial game. The next problem is hidden but trackable information. If information benefits a player and helps them succeed, then some players are going to track it. Of course they are. So trying to hide trackable information flies in the face of reality. If the players know what people are scoring, then just because you give them tokens that nobody else can see that tally up the score isn't going to help, because those players will keep track of the score. Designers have to face reality, as in any form of management. If you don't know what's reality, how can you change things to reach your goal? And the reality is, some people will track information. Now, if you've designed your game with the assumption that nobody's going to be a very good player, then that's another kettle of fish, but I don't design games that way, and I don't recommend that you do either. Another mistake, one of the bigger ones, is keeping an element in a game just because you like it. Again, this is okay if you're designing a game just for yourself as a hobby. But professionals design games to entertain or inform other people, not themselves. And one of the skills of game design is good self-criticism. It's recognizing when an element you like just isn't working and then ditching it. And the sooner you do that, the better. Another mistake is thinking you can fix one problem without consequences elsewhere. All experienced programmers know that fixing one bug or making one change in a program to add a feature can unintentionally cause other bugs to crop up. It's the same in games. Fixing one thing affects everything. Altering the rules mechanics can have unintended consequences. In other words, don't focus too much on one thing and forget how it affects other things, and test all changes. It works isn't good enough, which is related to the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. It's fairly easy to design a game to get to the 80% point where it works, but often at that point it isn't much of a game. It isn't really very interesting. The last 20% takes the most time and effort. For newbies, you may think your 80% done game is amazing because it's yours, but others won't see it that way. It works is just a step on the way to it's good. Failing to see the forest for the trees, another big mistake. Sometimes you can focus on the details, that is the trees, in a game so much that you don't see the overall picture anymore. It's pretty easy to do in game design. So you're fixing this and fixing that and adding this feature and taking away this feature, and the game as a whole is getting clunkier and it's getting worse, but you don't notice because you're focusing on these fixes and changes. Now that happens in all walks of life. I once read about a fighter plane being designed at Boeing, and they had an expert system to keep track of things. And over time they kept changing and adding features to the plane, because that's the way the military tends to do things, is add features so that the plane can be a solution to all your problems. But their expert system didn't track the weight. And what they ended up with, when somebody finally noticed, was an airplane that was too heavy to fly. They were focusing on the trees, and the forest, in effect, was burning down. Outliers. In testing a game, you get something like a bell curve or Gaussian curve, low at the ends and big in the middle. Outliers are the plays at the ends of the curve, the unlikely events, plays that don't happen very often, or happen rarely, really. When you test a game and one of these outliers occurs, don't rush to change the game drastically because of it. It may be an outlier that's not likely to happen. Nonetheless, you still have to take account of it and make the game so that it will work. Or the game's going to fail in the end because some people will have these outliers. It won't work and they'll say, what a dumb game. Examples. My game Doomstar was recently released in video version on Steam. It's a 2-player tactical space war game, and it tends to be played in like 15-20 minutes. However, one time my brother and his friend, who were the two most deliberate players I know, played, and they were very evenly matched, and the game went on and on and on, 2 hours. So I had to add a rule. That was an outlier, but I had to add a rule, something like the rule in chess where you have the same position 3 times and it's a draw, to take that into account. So I did change the game, but I didn't change it drastically. I didn't say throw it by hands and say, oh my God, this game is too long. I just recognized that I needed something for that particular outlier. Similarly, I have a new prototype called Gold Dragon, and the rules say that when the exploration cards are all used up, then the game is over. Well, play tested a game, and the last exploration card was a castle, which is very difficult to defeat, and it just kept going round and round. So I had to add a rule that if the last card or cards went around everybody once or twice, then the game was over anyway. Now, your family and friends may not be the best guide. Well, my family and friends, for the most part, don't play games, so it's not a problem. Or they play games, party games essentially. But your family and friends may be too nice to tell you your game sucks. I don't have that problem with my family. They also may not have sufficient expertise to be able to tell. That is the problem with most of my family. They may not be representative of your target market, also my family. So who cares what they think? Now, yes, sometimes you can get lucky. I have read that Settlers of Catan was only tested by the designer's family. But you can't expect to get lucky. Dominant strategies are bad except in puzzles. A dominant strategy is a way to play that everyone must follow in order to win. Think about it. Every puzzle has a dominant strategy, which is to say a solution. If you're making a pure puzzle, a dominant strategy is expected. If you're making a traditional style game, a dominant strategy ruins the game. Now, what we see frequently these days is multiple paths to victory, quote unquote. And that means there are several ways to solve the puzzle. And the so-called game is actually a parallel competition, a puzzle disguised as a game. But it solves more or less the problem of dominant strategies because you have several strategies that will work. Now, traditional style games, again, have no specific path to victory because they're not puzzles. Remember, dominant strategies are bad. Now, many of these points are discussed somewhere in my book-length online audiovisual courses, Learning Game Design, Part 1 and Part 2. and you can get information and discounts through pulseforgames.com. These are not free classes. Thanks for listening.